made the comment during the break that I want to make sure that he was setting up the database correctly, so I'll go do it one more time. And my suggestion for you to do it is to literally just come in there and in the XAMPP control panel, open up the shell. You've done that before. From the shell, MySQL space -u root. All right, as you can see up on the screen there. And enter, which gets you in there. Then minimize this, minimize XAMPP, and out on the P drive, find this file. The file that's called sql.sql, so it's under the P drive for the class, so highlight all of it, Control A, Control C to copy, then just take it, right mouse click, and paste it in. Hit enter, and that should do it. Now, if you try and you have some kind of a problem, let me know, and I'll be glad to work with you after class on it. But that should be all you have to do. Okay. All right, so jumping back to the book then. We left off on page 294. And I think today we're going to get, I'll go do about 10 more pages, whatever that brings us. So we'll get to about page 304. All right? And there's actually a chance we may finish this then on Thursday. That's fine. Again, if we do, then next Tuesday, all right, then next Tuesday, what I'll do is I'll go over chapter 14. That should take no more than an hour. And then next Thursday will just be a lab day in here. All right, if we finish early. All right, so starting on page 294, he talks about writing a utilities file. All right, it says this file will be included by every primary PHP script. On other sites, I might call this a config file, but this one does a little bit more than that. Now, there's going to be stuff in here that you may not have seen before. All right, just so you know that. They talk first about a class loading function. And he did talk about this in chapter 8, and I didn't talk about it very much, but to make it simple, just so you know, he's got a script, and one of the things that this script does is it goes and it automatically loads the two classes that he's written for the program. It loads them into memory so they're available to be used when they're needed. All right, so that's the first thing. It starts a session. And it checks for the presence of a user object previously stored in a session. So in other words, that's not exactly right. It starts a session if one needs to be added, to be started. All right? And then, as it says, it checks to see if there is a user object that was previously stored. So in other words, was there already a session running? It opens the database connection. And notice, again, it uses a PDO object in order to do this. So what I like about this, and this is, to be honest with you, this chapter is one of the reasons I chose this book. So about 4 weeks from now, something like that, 4 weeks from now, Tuesday and Thursday, when you come in here, you're going to be asked, and I know you love doing them, to do course evaluations. All right, because that'll be, 4 weeks from now, that's the end of week 8, so we're halfway through. All right, and when you're doing those, I would really like to hear, I like this book, I thought this book stunk. Probably not both comments, because that would confuse me, and it doesn't take that much to confuse me. But if you like the book, any books, all right, I'll tell you what, I got a thing today, I got to go home and look at it, but I got a thing from a publishing company, I didn't even know if they were legit, okay? And they asked me if I'd be interested in writing some of my own books for some of my own stuff that I do, and they would publish it. And it looks like they are legit. And I'm actually thinking about doing that. Not because I necessarily want to make a mint, but I can concentrate then on what I think is important. All right? And let's face it, Ditel, Gaddis, they only do so much. And sometimes I think, especially with Gaddis, and I think the guy's a terrific author, I really do. But sometimes I think they concentrate too much on things that aren't that important and not enough on things that are important. But that's my bias. All right. Now he's going to talk in here too about serializing and deserializing objects. We've talked about this a little bit before, but I want you to hear it anyway. And actually, it's instead of serializing and deserializing, it's serialize and unserialize. Okay? All right. You've heard me give this analogy before, but it's the old saying that if I've got 100 pounds of potatoes and you tell me, here, put them in this bag, and you give me a 5-pound bag, it's going to be difficult. All right? I suppose if I would pulverize them somehow and make potato mush, I might be able to do that. But it's the same kind of thing that when you've got a packet of information that you want to send over a wire someplace, okay? That the same kind of an idea that if I've got this much information to send, I'm holding my hands about 4 feet apart, and I'm only able to send half of that at a time, so like 2 feet at a time, let's say, then I've got to break it up into packets and send a packet and then send the other packet, and then when I get to the other end, put them back together again. So this idea of breaking it up is the serializing, and the putting it back together is the unserializing. And that's what he talks about in here. Because he says some of these objects, if you create a complex enough object, the object is going to be so big that you're not going to be able to send all of it at one time. The good news is, all right, that depending on how you write this, this may or may not ever become an issue. It only really becomes an issue when what you're working on is a lot more complex than most of the stuff that we're working on. All right? So he talks about this, and he says that the same thing has to happen with objects. First, the serialized object will only store the values of the attributes along with the name. So what he's getting to is you might have something that looks like this. A string of size 5 that holds Karen, a string of size 7 that holds Toronto, a string of size 9 that holds Stephanie, etc. All right? Why? So you're able to send those things over individually. And after you send them over individually, you've got to go and kind of put them back together again. The example that I've given before, too, is imagine that you took a house, and you lived in a house, and you decided to move to another state, but you really, really loved your house. So you literally took your house apart brick by brick. And then when you got to a new house, you put it back together again brick by brick. That's the act of serializing and deserializing, or serializing and unserializing. All right, so that's what he talks about in here. It says, if you go to store an object in a session, PHP will automatically serialize and unserialize it on the fly for you. So if we look here on page 295, again, one of the things that I was impressed at in this book is the size of most of his files. This utilities file, the whole thing is 30 lines. And in those 30 lines, I would say if you took out the blank lines and you took out the comments, it's probably about 15 to 20 lines. All right, so this page needs to do the setup and configuration required by every other page. So again, this loads those classes. So it's going to make the stuff available. It starts up a session. It checks to see if there's a user. It attempts to create your database connection using a PDO object. And we talked a little bit about this in the last class, that when you're working with PDO, when you're working basically with objects, so you're typically going to use a try-catch. Yes. No, it's checking to see if there already is a user set up for the session, basically. All right, so it's checking right here. Notice if it's true, the session is basically, you've already got a session. All right, so it's basically identifying it with that user. Otherwise, there isn't one. Let's take a look at what let's take a look at what he says here on the bottom of page 295 in the top of 296. All right, it says the user variable, as already explained, will be a reference to the currently logged in user. The user object will be stored in the session upon successfully logging in. On subsequent pages, the user variable will be reconstituted from the session. So in other words, as you're perusing your way from page to page, it's making sure it's not starting up a new session. All right. Bless you. So what you start to see in here also, if you look on page 296 at the bottom of the page here, the figure that's shown there, is what he's saying is, okay, if you get to this point, but if for some reason you couldn't connect to the database, for whatever reason, you're still going to get your heading, but your content area is basically going to be for naught. And you'll notice that you don't get a footer in here. All right, and I believe that's the way that, I'm not sure if it's really that way or not, because when I looked at it before, there was something in there. But the point is, it's like I showed you on here before. Where are we? Come on. All right, it's like we looked on over here before. This all works, but if I remove the database, it's just junk. You'll still be able to function somewhat, but if I don't have the database in here, you're not going to be able to log in. You're not going to be able to register. All right? You may or may not be able to. A contact page would be nice to have. So if there was a problem, you could bring up a simple form and say, what the problem was. You shouldn't be able to get to any archives. I mean, think about this. Archives, log in, and register in some form or other will all require a database. The home page won't, and the contact may or may not. If you're actually taking everything that somebody sends in and you're logging that and putting it into a database file, that would require a database also. So if you have not connected to the database, you're kind of dead in the water other than being able to be at your home page. That's what I'm saying. That from right here, the only thing that would make sense would be the home page, so you could bring this stuff up. But you wouldn't be able to do much of anything else because most of it, and when you think about that, it depends again on how that's done, because if this information that's here, if you're getting that from the database and you don't have the database, how are you getting that? Yeah. All right. He talks next, starting on page 297 and 298. It's a very short description of this error.html file. And what he talks about is what he wants basically to do, as you can see here on the bottom of page 297, is to set something up so that if there's a problem, you'll get some kind of an error message. Now, notice what it says here. All significant problems will be handled by this single view file. Okay? And it says an error occurred. The content is not viewable because an error occurred. We apologize for any inconvenience, etc. Details not for public consumption. Okay? Now this is kind of important because the stuff that you see here in blue, that's what you're going to turn on when you're in test mode. But that's going to be either turned off or removed when you go live. All you want to show the user once you go live is this. And by now, we've talked about this several times. That should make sense to everybody. So that's what he explains on 297 and 298. And then the last thing that we'll go through for the next 6 pages or so, he defines the classes. And again, you may or may not agree with what I'm going to say, but what I like about this is the brevity of each class. There are only 2 of them. He mentions here on the top of 299, surprisingly, I was able to pull off the entire site using only 2 classes. All right, it says that's a misleading count because he does use PDO classes, but 2 of his own classes. All right, they are page and user, which we'll look at in detail. And literally, the page class is on the bottom of page 299 and page 300, and the user class is on page 302. So they both have approximately 50 or so lines in them, which is not a lot of lines of code for a full-fledged class. So The page class will be used to represent a page content. This will come up in several places. On the home page, all right, which shows the 3 most recent additions on the individual pages. So again, what he's saying is, there's the home page, there's the individual page, okay? And when new pages of content are added, and I don't believe that he actually put that in here, so we can add a new page. Read more here, register, login, contact, login. I think you do have to be logged in, and then you will have the ability to go and put in more another page. All right. Oops. So this is part of it here, and this is just a comment. So let's look at it. It says this class contains 6 attributes: ID, creator ID, title, content, date added, and date updated. What is that? That's everything that's in the page table, right? That's exactly what it is. And then notice he's got 7 methods, and 6 of them are right here. Get ID, get creator ID, get title, get content, get page updated, or date updated, and get date added, and get date updated. So that's 6 of them. And the other one is shown right there, get intro. You'll notice if you look here on page 300, he mentions that what he did was he made all those variables protected. Now I know I do this, and I know that most of the time you don't answer, but I'm asking you to please try. What is protected? What does protected access mean? Question, or the response was, nobody from the outside can get in. You're on the right track. Public means it's available to everybody, right? Private means it's only directly available in that class. Protected means it's only directly available in that class and any descendants of that class. All right, so if that's the parent class, any children can change it. All right, so it's sort of like a publicly private or a privately public type of thing, sort of. You'll notice that these get methods, again, notice how small they are. Just return the ID, return the creator ID, return the title, return the content, return the date added, return the date updated. Okay? Now, what this last thing, this get intro does, and as soon as you see it, you'll be, oh, that makes sense. It says, give me the first, whatever we put in there for characters. I think they use 200. So afterwards, they append a dot, 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 and they put a read more link in here. Same kind of thing here and here. That makes sense? So the page itself doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, the page class. Again, if you don't like my explanations, he does explain it here on pages 299, 300, and the first half of page 301. Then he gets to the user class. And as mentioned, this represents registered and logged in users only, i.e. users not logged in are not represented by this class. All right? Like the page class, it begins with the attributes of the database that have already been defined. From there, as it says, to address the needs of the site, there are 4 methods. One that returns the ID, all right, and the remaining ones that are Boolean values, meaning, of course, they return true or false. Is the user an administrator? Can the user edit the current page? Can the user create new pages? Remember, only only administrators or authors are able to go in and actually make changes. All right. So when you look in here again, we've got our variables. These are the same variables that exist in the user table. All right, and we've got get ID is admin, can create page, can edit page, can create page. So here's our data members right here. There's our get ID. And again, notice all of these. It's returning true or false. And a lot of times when you have these, I think they also call them like predicate functions. And they oftentimes have a name that starts with is or can, like they're showing right here. is admin. True or false? Can edit page. True or false? Can create page. True or false? All right. Again, it's pretty simplistically done. And he does explain this. He goes on it step by step, starting on the bottom of 301 and all of 303. He does also mention, he says, by placing the logic in the class, only one line of code ever needs to be tweaked if you want to add new kinds of users, which is kind of nice. All right. I think that's enough for today. Thought it'd be around 11:30, so we'll pick it up next time on creating the home page on page 304. So we've got approximately 20 pages left in the chapter. All right, not even. Yeah, it's about 20. And if we finish that next time,